This is there we go. Hey, gang. Um, and I'm back. Welcome to the Ghosts of Bacon podcast. I was trying out a new way of doing the intro, and that did not go well. Great to see so many familiar names. Carolyn is here. She's saying go for the bacon, and that's what we're doing tonight for sure. Um, and my sisters Penny and Patty are in the house. I want to start out by saying um, it was awesome hanging out with you guys today. We had a great time. Lunch was great, Patty. Thank you so much. And with all of the hate and spite we've been seeing online lately, it was very, very nice and refreshing just to spend time with the people we love the most. So great seeing you guys. Hey Z, good to see you. Barbie, you made it. Ray's here. Um, let's see. Adam, Barbara, Kat is in the house. All right. That didn't sound right for some reason. Anyway, um, I have an interesting show for you this evening because what I wanted to do, because of some of the current events that have happened recently, um, I, I was thinking, well, how do we make sense of some of these things? And once again, it goes back to the teachings of Sir Francis Bacon, and it goes back to what he called the idols of the mind. Um, what I'm going to do is show you uh, uh, what these are, and let's see. I think it was. Let me see. Where is it? Oh, we lost the comment. Darn it. Hey, Jenny. Um, yes, because someone actually listed all of them here before the podcast just started, and then as soon as it started, um, I think we lost it. Hey, Stan, glad you could make it. Um, so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a little dog and pony show, and we're going to talk about Bacon's Idols of the Mind and how it relates to um, certain current events and people's reactions to them. So I'm going to go ahead and put that up there. There we go. Slideshow. So Bacon's idols of the mind, it relates to what we call logical fallacies, cognitive biases. And what he was interested in, of course, was finding the truth, understanding the nature of reality, well, nature itself. And so in his book, The Novum Organum, it basically translates to a new instrument. In other words, this was a new scientific instrument, a new way of exploring nature. He when it comes to science and learning, he said we can do this better. And because in the past, we'll get into that here in a minute. Everyone was following what was called the Aristotelian model, Aristotle, and the reason is because it basically focused on deductive thinking and reasoning only. And Bacon was like, inductive reasoning is superior in a variety of ways. So he basically ended up rejected it. And the science at the time was always built upon Greek philosophy. And he says, well, this is good, but we can do better. And this is when he introduced his scientific method, favoring his inductive reasoning. And so he says, in order to do this, we have to be thinking clearly um, for a variety of reasons. And what we have to avoid what he called idols of the mind. And so these are patterns of thinking, if you will, ways that we view the world, and it actually filters out what's really there sometimes. And it forces us or causes us to make incorrect assumptions about the world around us. And this is basically, in modern parlance, what we say today, we call these cognitive biases. And he understood this all too well. Uh, the first one that he really identified is the one that we call first conclusion bias. That means the first answer you arrive at, we tend to favor that and think it's true, even if it might not be. The second is very powerful in all of us. It's called confirmation bias. This causes us to remember things that we already agree with, and we are drawn to information that we already think is true. And so, what we do is we seek whatever we think is true. We look for information that that will confirm it for us. So you basically cherry pick your evidence um, to make yourself right and feel like you're right. And so and this also causes us to, when we're shown facts and logic that run counter to how we would like things to be or the way we believe them to be, we place them under undue scrutiny. And then this is called disconfirmation bias, when someone's proving you wrong and you just dismiss it um, out of hand, because no, that can't possibly be true. And so what he did was he organized these ideas into four idols of the mind. So the first one is idols of the tribe. Now, this has to do with how humanity itself is hardwired. Um, he basically, we have false assumptions and we trust our five senses. And he was well aware of the ancient philosophers. He referred to this as the false mirror, that, when we look at things, maybe we're not really seeing things correctly the way um, they really are. And there was a philosopher named Parmenides, and Bacon would be very familiar with him. He had a very famous quote that sums up his philosophy, which was, if I can get it right, the mind perceives an awareness of eternals through the imperfect senses, themselves fragmented and temporal. Now, what this means is that, human eyes can't see all of the light spectrum. We can't hear the entire range of sound. Um, and so we're limited. And he says it's temporal. In other words, we're trapped in physical awareness and in time. So it's happening in real time. So when we're perceiving something, um, it's still fleeting by us because of time. So this makes us limited. And so the next one was idols of the cave. Now, um, these are ideologies and emotions. Um, and I'm not going to get into where the names of these idols come from. It's long and boring and tedious and has to do with linguistics and all of that. So, but he says that our preconceived notions, our ideologies, the things we believe in, will limit us. And so, um, let's see if I can change this a little bit. Maybe that'll work. Um, so when that happens, this is what kicks in our cognitive biases, right? Confirmation, disconfirmation bias, the things we believe in, our political opinions, and so on. And it often leads to just straight up misunderstanding what's being put in front of us. The next he calls idols of the marketplace. Think politics. This is when people misuse words in order to mislead people. This is, he calls it marketplace because that's where you see sellers selling things, hawking their wares, and kind of misleading people in order to try to get them to buy. So advertising went back to then, but it also has to do with propaganda, which I'm going to be getting into in this presentation as well. He also mentioned that this involves all political discourse because people will misuse words in order to convince the other side that they're right. The last he calls idols of the theater, and this has to do with Aristotle and how he rejected that's supposed to be deductive reasoning, not detective autocorrect. Um, and what this does is this taps into all previous learning and philosophy into history. So, in other words, idols of the theater, he's talking about the theater of science here. So people hold up these old ways of doing things, the way Aristotle did, um, as using that as the idol or the model of how things should be done. He says you can't do that. You can't just hold on to the old ways of doing things and adhere to what's considered to be dogma and tradition just because, well, it's always been done that way with this, so that's how things are. He says no, we got to get rid of that. So as I said, cognitive bias, what this is, these are opinions that we have. These are assumptions that we've grown up with, and we hold them as facts in our head. And the first one I mentioned, of course, was first conclusion bias. This is your first observation, your first assumption, the first thing you hear. That's when the story sticks. And it may or may not necessarily be true. And the other one, of course, confirmation bias. As I said, this is cherry picking our evidence and, confirming our beliefs and feeling smart, like, oh, I just proved myself to be right. And basically, what these things do, they cause us to believe things that, frankly, just aren't true. And then we hold on to these opinions as if they're facts, when in fact, when we look at them under close scrutiny, they're not. And so, what Bacon taught us, and what I always tried to teach my rhetoric and critical thinking students, when you account for your biases and you recognize that you have them, um, it helps you to clear your thinking and you start to think more objectively. Now, I remember a time when the news was objective instead of fair and balanced. I don't know if any of you remember that, but I threw this in here because I love this model in terms of thinking. Plato used his allegory of the cave to teach an idea about how he thought people learned, and it fits into with this whole idea perfectly. It has nothing to do with Bacon's Idols of the Cave. This is a different cave, um, and Plato had his theory of forms. In other words, we learn the shapes of things before we learn the real things, and so on. And out there, he said there are ideals of truth, right? And what we only capture are hints of them. And as we refine our thinking and so on, that eventually we will be able to see the ideal form. And this is how we form knowledge. Now, this allegory, let me explain the setup of this. You can see this little picture here on the side. In it, he describes, he says, picture some, slaves sitting in a dark cave, all side by side, chained. Their heads aren't allowed to move to the left or right. And all they're doing is, and if you can see my cursor, staring at this wall of the cave. Now, behind them is diffused daylight that actually, if you go through this little tunnel, you'll actually go out of the cave. But meanwhile, inside the cave, what we have is a fire in the back. And then we have a little roadway here along the middle. And what they were doing is there would be puppeteers walking along the roadway carrying puppets on sticks. And when the slaves would see the shapes uh, of the shadows on the wall, not the things themselves, but the shadows, they would name them. And the one who could, always predict which one was coming next and so on was considered to be the smart person. And, and that's how they would set up their little hierarchy here in the dark, staring at shadows. So outside of the cave represents the idea of true reality. And so what happened, he says, I want you to imagine that someone one day wakes up and they're loose. They can turn and look and they see these people sitting beside them and they recognize, oh, this is the source of all the voices I've been hearing beside me all this time. And then he turns around and looks and he sees the puppets and the puppeteers. And his eyes adjust to that fire behind him. He can actually make out the actual shapes of the puppets. Suddenly, the puppets are the real reality. And he realizes these are just shadows on the wall. They're not real. But then he notices that there is diffuse daylight and he crawls out of the cave. And at first, his eyes would hurt and he wouldn't be able to see anything. We've all, especially here in the North Country and in Canada, on those bright, snowy days, or when there's a lot of snow, and you walk outside and the bright light just blinds you and you can't see for a minute until your eyes adjust. Well, he says, imagine that. And then after a while, first he would, the person who got out would look at the ground and then eventually look, directly at a tree and then would look at the reflection of the sun in water. And eventually he would be able to look up and see the source of light in the sky. He says, wouldn't that guy want to return and free all of his friends? Say, hey, you got to see this. These shadows are nothing anymore. He says, but think about it. When this guy goes back inside the cave, suddenly it's going to be far darker for him. And it's going to take him a long time for his eyes to adjust. And he's going to try to wake them up and say, hey, listen, none of this is real. You got to see what's outside of this cave. And these are just shadows of puppets and etc. And and then Plato says, it was actually Socrates who said, wouldn't then the people who were in there say, you went out there and you ruined your eyes. You can't see what's right here in front of you. This is perfectly plain to us. And so suddenly you have two disparate views of reality. And so suddenly this one person knows the shadows aren't real. They're nothing but hints of the truth, right? So he turns and he sees the puppets. They're still not the real thing. Nothing was real until he was free and out of the cave. This fire, fire is always a symbol of knowledge, but here it's actually the false light. The real light is the sun out in the sky. False light, therefore, represents false knowledge. And here you see it, close up. Now, instead of slaves seated here, not able to turn. Imagine a giant big screen TV right here. Instead of shadows on the wall, we're watching CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, Facebook, Twitter. Get the picture? It's not real. Shadows on a wall. So in this case, obviously, the slaves in the cave are actually representing us, and this is what Plato was trying to teach us by recording this allegory. And so, what I do is I often point out to my students, as I'm back in the day, I used to use an actual overhead projector, which actually does cast shadows up on a screen, which was a lot of fun. It also would cast every hair on my arm up on the screen as well, which they always got a big kick out of. And well, occasionally a banana would show up on my desk unannounced. But I would tell them, look at all of you sitting in a row. Who are you like in this allegory? Look at the shadows I'm casting up here on the wall and telling you that that's reality. And that made me the puppet master, right? So I also want you to consider that this slideshow is just like the shadows on the wall in a very real sense. But what we're trying to do is get out of that cave, and we're trying to see reality. And as I said, the shadows, anything that appears on a screen, it's nothing but shadows, gang. Now, who are the puppeteers? Is it someone who has your best interest at heart, such as myself as a teacher, as an educator, trying to open people's minds? Or is it the people that own these alphabets, these letters here on the screen, MSNBC, CNN, and Fox, etc.? And so what I do, I use this method of helping people understand propaganda. That was always really the nature of my job. And what this does is it breaks those chains of the slaves, and they're able to escape and get out and begin to get a better view of reality. Some of them only make it to the puppeteers, and you know what? That's fine. But hopefully someday they'll see the true light. So, recent events. I caused a little poo-poo storm on Facebook the other day because one of my best friends in life was celebrating the death and the murder of Charlie Kirk. Now, before Charlie Kirk was assassinated and murdered, I didn't know a lot about him. I just kind of knew what circle he ran with and didn't really pay much attention. But people told me, oh, he's a terrible person. He says terrible things. And so when he, being such a controversial figure and being the fact that, you know, here he was just kind of practicing his freedom of speech, this bothered me. And I blasted my best friend. I said, how can you celebrate a murder of a husband and a father? He says, well, he said terrible things. And I'm like, so what? And so what I do, what I've always done as an educator, I went to the original sources. This is what I teach my students they need to do. And I actually went and found some of his speeches. I went and found his podcasts. I actually started watching them for myself. No one wants to do that, especially as someone who, you know, a lot of people, one of the things that he was accused of was saying that gay people should be stoned to death. As it turns out, he never said that, as you're going to see. And this is what I found out. And that's a horrible thing to say. No one should ever even express something remotely like that. And anyone who knows me and knows whom all of my friends are, you'd get it. But most people don't want to go to the original source and like, I know I disagree with that guy politically, and I'm not going to go listen to that garbage. And what happens is they only have one view of this guy. So when I went to the original sources, and as I said, it's a professional hazard for me. This is what I teach people to do. I'm like, well, if I teach them to do it, I have to do it too. And Kirk never made the statement that gay people should be stoned to death. However, what he did say, he was on his podcast, and he was. I'll show you the explanation here in a minute, but there was another YouTuber, children's YouTuber, and she said she made the statement that, as you'll see, that where in the Bible where it says "love your neighbor," that this means that being gay is okay. And he said you got to be careful about the way you cherry pick information and use the Bible to support a point of view. And then I'll show you what he said in reality. So Stephen King tweeted that Charlie Kirk believes that gay people should be stoned to death. Later, he had to admit that it wasn't true at all. He retracted the statement, but after that, well, what do they say after the horse leaves the barn? So here we have an example of first conclusion bias. That's the first thing people hear about this guy, and it's from what they think is a reputable source. This famous guy. It turns out not to even be true, and so that story sticks. So in reality, here's what happened. It says in 2024, Kirk criticized children's YouTuber Miss Rachel for arguing that, quote, the Bible verse, love thy neighbor in the Leviticus 18 scripture would apply to gay people. On the podcast, Kirk said, by the way, Miss Rachel, you might want to crack open that Bible of yours. In a lesser reference, part of the same part of scripture is in Leviticus 18, is that if thou shalt lay with another man, shall be stoned to death. He suggests saying, and then below we see how Stephen King was apologizing. He said, and this is a close-up of it, I apologize for saying Charlie Kirk advocated stoning gays. What he actually demonstrated was how some people cherry-pick biblical passages. And so this is why this stuff is so important even today, more so, I think, than ever. Because that's what we have here, first conclusion bias and then confirmation bias. So King's nearly 7 million viewers, has 7 million followers on X. So if this was their first impression of Charlie Kirk and like live under a rock like I do, I guess, this would be first conclusion bias, right? They would get that and say, oh my gosh, what a horrible human being. And if people tend to be left-leaning in our political system, this engages their confirmation bias, like, oh my God, this person is reprehensible, and let's share this, let's retweet it, and so that lie gets spread. And if people are right-leaning, well, boy, that disconfirmation bias kicks in, right? Are they going to start? All of a sudden, they start trolling everyone, and this suddenly you have this huge amount of fomenting back and forth without, and it's all about a lie without any facts to back it up. So yes, he retracted it, and again, the retraction would be subject to the same exact responses from the same groups of people. And at that point, like I said, that information is already out there. So I'm not here to lionize Charlie Kirk tonight. Like I said, I'm as familiar with him as I've been able to get over the last few days since his murder. And no matter how you look at it, it's a tragedy. And I don't care what anybody says, even if they're, my direst political opponent, they should never be murdered for words coming out of their mouth. It's a horrible thing. And so Bacon had this to say about narratives, and I'm going to get into that a little bit real quick. But again, my professional hazard here kicked in again in the year 2000 during the Bush-Cheney regime. And it was like they flipped a switch. Somebody did. And suddenly the news changed here in this. I don't know how it is for you folks, my friends up there north in Canada, if you ever noticed this, but here in the States, news has turned into something different. And what I noticed was suddenly I was hearing the same stories on every channel, and they were all using the same as fallacies of logic. Fallacies of logic are shortcuts in thinking that are not based on facts, but they sound reasonable when you pitch them this way. And it's one of the main tools propagandists use. And I realized, wait, they're using fallacies of logic. Fallacy means falsehood. A falsehood is a lie. So as soon as I started seeing these, I thought, we're in trouble. And then these narratives were also designed to appeal to confirmation bias, right? So they can make a bare assertion with no support for it whatsoever that they knew that their viewers were going to watch because they tune in for that perspective because they share the same perspective, same politics. And so when they just make these bare statements, they don't need facts to back it up because the person is watching say, yep, I know, yeah, I figured that. I know that's true. Now, Bacon, when he was talking about narratives, he said, the old narratives that are based on all of this dogma and tradition are often misleading. And a famous Bacon scholar wrote, he said, Reality still had to be embraced directly and reported without flinching, but it is also best delivered the same way it was discovered, retaining a comparable vividness and play of the emotions. Nature and her secrets must be as stimulating to the imagination as our poetry and fables. To that end, Bacon advised us to use aphorisms, illustrations, stories, fables, analogies, anything that conveys truth from the discoverer to his readers as clearly as a picture. The mind, he argued, is not like a wax tablet. On a tablet, you cannot write the new till you rub out the old. On the mind, you cannot rub out the old except by writing in the new. And that was a quote from E.O. Wilson in his book Consilience. And I got this via the Farnham Street blog, wonderful website. So this brings up the importance of narratives. Bacon was about understanding reality, right? And he says, so when we make these clearer observations after we clean out the cobwebs, we clean out these cognitive biases, these idols of the mind, we're going to get a clearer vision of nature. We're going to get a clearer vision of an understanding of reality. However, this can all be used in reverse for the purposes of propaganda, and I assure you it is used. When it's done as effectively as it has been done, narratives tend to stick. Okay, when you do a really great job of telling a story, that's what remains usually as that's the truth. And so, if you engage that disconfirmation bias, suddenly it doesn't stick quite so well. I think this explains some of the unhinged behavior we see on both sides. We have extremists and radicals on both ends, and I think that when they're unable to get rid of disconfirmation bias and set it aside and take a look at something that they um, might not like, that suddenly they'll have a clearer view of reality back here towards the middle. So that's what I got for you, gang. See, now this is the kind of thinking that I like, and as usual, and I'm not surprised it comes from Tao. I'm an anarchist, and I can't stand Trump. I think he's the worst president in U.S. history. But even he didn't deserve to get target practice. The same with Charlie. He didn't deserve it. Rest in peace. I agree, my friend. And that was, my stance. I told people, I said, no, this, no matter how you do it, this is wrong. I don't care what you think of this guy, left, right, and different. And the people who dogpiled on me after that moment, it was really kind of spectacular and shocking. But I love me some awkward, so I entered into the fray, and I said, no, you can't do that. And the big thing is that I embrace, anyone's views, however they want to view the world, whatever their politics are. I really don't care. But I'm going back to the beginning of the chat. Bits of bacon. I like that, Barbara, very much. You're welcome, Stan. And again, AO Tao always reminds me of this. Yes, make sure you keep hitting that like button for Ghosts of Bacon. Yes, Barbara. Thank you. Aki, good to see you, my friend. Isn't that the truth, Jenny? Knowledge is the truest and best gift, I think. Wow. And it keeps getting better. Good job, Aki. Perhaps knowledge is the work and wisdom is the gift. I love the way you guys think. Again, Bacon's right. Everyone should be a critical thinker and stop being sheep who follow the herd. And all the way to the slaughterhouse. Isn't that the fact? Let's see. And again, Jenny with it. I don't think knowledge itself is dangerous. It's the manipulation of it. It's why discernment is necessary. A lot of people outsource their discernment and thinking instead of observing them. It's like you're speaking my words right out of my own brain, Jenny. I always tell this my students, at any time that I give them a critical thinking problem, and they pull out the phone or want to start googling it, I'm like, whoa, don't outsource your thinking. Another student was checking a fact checker site, and I said, don't outsource your thinking. Don't let someone else be your fact checker. You need to be the fact checker. And either Plato, Socrates, I can't remember which one either. And educated people is the biggest fear of any government or ruler can fear, which I believe is why I've seen in my career the dumbing down of America. Nothing less. Exactly, Barbara. And that was the right thing to do. And I just wish more people would do that. And it was funny because when I posted that online, all of a sudden people who are Trump haters started bashing me, and I said nobody said anything about Donald Trump. I said the only people talking about Donald Trump are you. Um, it was just very bizarre. But I think it's because people feel so strongly about these things. Exactly, Tal. And again, it when you really get into these people, it's hard to like any of them. But yeah, nobody deserves that. You're right. You become what you eat. Aki, that's exactly it. That's it, Tommy. Idols of the marketplace, 100%. And like I said, I have a feeling I know what caused it. But like I said, I remember that day. I couldn't help but think. All of a sudden, it dawned on me as I'm watching this and I'm seeing all these fallacies of logic on the screen. And I started changing channels, looking to see what was being said on the others. And it was the same narrative, slightly different spin and different cognitive biases were the target, but it was the same narrative and using the same techniques. And I found that to be very scary. If people are afraid to speak their true thoughts, it's hard to practice freedom of association because you're never sure who you're associating with. It's one reason I like free speech. Jenny, that's exactly it. But the thing, and I think that people nowadays are afraid to speak their true thoughts. Since I caused this little poop storm, uh, my sisters are dying right now. I know they're laughing. Um, the So many people have come to me privately and said, I really liked what you said. I can't say it online, um, but I agree with you 100%. A lot of these people were, one of them was a former colleague of mine that I taught with before I retired. Wonderful educator. And, she has the same philosophy I had when it comes to the kids. They shouldn't know what our politics are. You're there to teach them how to think critically and make up their own minds. And, that's how she and I, but we always, and she's another one who goes back to primary sources, checking facts, be a fact checker, be your own fact checker. And so, yeah, she got on, she's unfortunately, she says, I'm still working, so I can't state an opinion because teachers don't have free speech, unfortunately. A lot of people don't know that. That's for sure. And which is why, the puppets in the cave represent, the shadows on the wall, which is what we're absorbing through our screens every day. Thanks, Patty. Love you too. There you go, Daniel. That's it exactly. Divide and conquer. Thanks, Adam. I appreciate that very much. It was always one of my favorite lessons to do, and I gave you guys the Reader's Digest condensed version. I didn't want to go on and on too long, but because you know how I get. Well, thank you, Ray, for that. So glad to see we're finally connecting current events to bacon. Yeah, people don't realize. I'll put that up for you to your correction. Um, how relevant and how much of our modern day that he's responsible for creating and helping to create. Barbara says the lack of critical thinking, the fact that it isn't taught in school, society is encouraging to the very bias they're exploiting. And again, that's exactly what you're hitting it on the head, Barbara. Exactly what I'm saying here. Um, you know, more teachers in other schools that I was talking to, the class that I taught, it was a college level rhetoric and critical thinking class, basically English, 102, um, in most colleges. And I found out that they weren't even touching on the critical thinking side. And I asked them why, and they said, "Well, they pick that up while we're doing this." I said, "No, they don't." And what I came to realize is I found one other teacher who said, "Oh yeah, I really hammer cognitive bias. I really hammer, logical fallacies and propaganda." I said, "Thank God, I thought I was the only one." And she's kind of whispered to me. She goes, uh, "I think some of the other people just don't know how to teach critical thinking." And I thought about it. I'm like, to be fair, it's the hardest skill to teach. And I realize, because I've done it for so long, um, it's really hard to teach people how to think critically. Um, and I get it. So, if nobody wants to keep doing something that they're not good at themselves, and if you don't really know how to even begin or where to start, how do you? So I feel for them. It's not really their fault. Jenny, I've said for years that taking cursive out of school is dangerous because it means our youth can't read our founding docs for themselves. Yes, dumbing down America. Very true. 100%. And a lot of people don't realize this, but cursive does something else. It helps people who have uh, slight forms of dyslexia to learn how to correct it a little bit, because you're connecting the letters together, right? And so that's been lost. But yeah, the idea of being able to go back and read the founding fathers' documents written in cursive, what a concept. Oh my gosh, yes, Aki. Bacon set into action the morphology of language to become reality itself. And that's the narrative, isn't it? And if it's a false narrative, we have people walking around, you know, carrying this perfect world that they envision in their minds that doesn't match up with the real one, and they flip the F out. Another good point. Jenny says if people are afraid to speak up, it creates a false consensus where the few can speak for the many. Very dangerous thing. That I swear to God, I have the smartest people watching this show. I don't know how I ever met you guys, but that's exactly it. And if you think for 1 second that that's not something that's created or possibly encouraged on purpose, you'd have to be very naive to think that that's just an accident. Tao, the world needs more bacons. Hashtag GOB. Absolutely. Um, we we need more people, um, and the more I looked into Charlie Kirk, I was really kind of what impressed me most was here's somebody who sought out people who disagreed with him and said, "Hey, let's talk." Um, and the the few debates that I watched, he was funny. He wasn't mean. He was engaging, and he would ask them my favorite question that I always asked to my students when they said something I didn't particularly disagree or didn't particularly agree with. I'd say, "That's really interesting. Why do you think that?" And so I think that if more people did exactly that, and I always tried to encourage my students to do it, but they were teenagers, and well, they already knew it all. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things, one of those techniques that I think that, especially when you're being challenged, when says someone says something that just viscerally you really disagree with that, if you're able to, set aside the emotion, uh, the best thing to do is to say, "That's interesting. Why do you think that? Why do you suppose that is?" And suddenly you have the person explaining themselves, and one of two things is going to happen, and this happens every time, people. Either they're going to look at you and say, I heard that somewhere, which they're going to, in that moment, realize that's probably not a real good reason to just automatically believe it. Or they're going to give you a really good explanation of why they believe what they believe. And you're going to realize that that person has reasons that to them are just as valid for believing what they believe as the reasons that you have for believing what you believe. And when people do that, they start to understand each other better. That's true communication going on right there. And it's authentic. And when people are, like Jenny said, if, they're afraid to say their opinion, or, if the person is reacting in a way that makes them afraid to say their opinion, that's not a good way to set up discourse. And so, with all these things going on today, and for whatever reason, when that murder happened, it affected me, and so I just went into the mode that I always go into when I don't understand something. When something seems so outrageous that I can't understand it, I seek to understand it. So I seek out new information and places I haven't gone for it before. And lo and behold, I learned an awful lot. And for that part of it, I'm grateful. As far as the people who, let's see, I stopped looking at Facebook yesterday. And last time I knew, everyone's been telling me, oh, by the way, you should see all the vile things people are writing. It's okay. I have a plan, and they're not going to like it. I'll leave it at that. I'm going to just tell the truth. Thank you, Penny. Well done, Jake. I cannot tell how many times I have changed my opinion after watching or reading the original source rather than watching or reading a biased news media. Isn't that the truth, Penny? It's like there's so many times, but you know how it is. You were an English teacher too, professor, and when you see something like that, and I always have, wait a minute, that something here doesn't sound right. And especially when I notice, like I said, the cognitive bias or the fallacies of logic, the propagandist techniques, I'm like, I need to go check that out in the original source. And lo and behold, it's always different. Well said, Penny. You know what, Jenny, you're exactly right. Cancel culture, that's really what it was about, was, shutting down people's opinions. Well, Barbara's got a suggestion from Barbara, Duncan, Jake, maybe a topic for another show, but your thoughts on modern parapsychology and altered states of consciousness as a means to break free of cultural bias and what Bacon would have thought. Oof. I I could do that. I, I know one person who has a strong opinion about that, and uh, he's at a football game right now. And last time I talked to him earlier today, he's in no shape for coming on the show. But John Edwards' ascended master theory ties right in with that very much, Barbara. Thanks, Penny. You're absolutely, truth will set you free. 100%. Love you too. Yeah, Jenny, I'm right there with you. And it was one of those things where I happened to just see it, and when it's someone you've known your whole life, and loved as a best friend, and seeing them full of hate, it was really startling for me, and it made me angry, and I reacted, and so it goes. Oh, Daniel, I couldn't agree more with you, buddy. Daniel says, I think Bacon would be very disappointed with our society. He wanted a better world for people to live in. People still have the same faults, and the pursuit of money still rules the hearts of humans. Yeah, money and power. Isn't that the truth? I agree, Aki. He really is a great mind. So, all right, gang. Hey, we went for 47 minutes tonight. You a little bit longer than I have been lately. For a longest time, I was trying to reach that hour mark, but I really like having this ability to kind of give and take, go a little longer if I need to, go shorter if I don't need to. So I know you did, Patty. I know. But thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. And That's right, Adam. 47 minutes. Marion reverse cipher. Oh, yeah, Tommy. Love the line in King Lear. To plainness honor's bound when majesty falls to folly. Thanks, buddy. Yes, it concerns me too, Jenny. So listen, people, and let's see. Thank you, Dad, if you're watching. Um, hope you like the show. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and call it quits for this evening, people. Listen, thanks for spending the time with me, hearing my thoughts, um, and I imagine that there will be a whole lot of comments and replies under this one if people watch when it's up on YouTube a little bit later. So, thank you all for coming. Be cool to each other. And until next time, take care.